Good morning, everybody. It still is good morning. Tricky enough to get on stage, let alone chair this panel. Julia, thank you so much. As a super introduction, leaves me with very little to do, apart from ask our esteemed panel some interesting questions. Following on from Julia's introduction, what you see here is representation from international standards organisations and national standards bodies across the globe, representing the UK, North America, Europe, and the ISO international standards bodies. Before we get started, we're going to try and leave some time for you guys to ask some questions. So please think about that as we go through. Hopefully we'll have 10 minutes at the end to go through those questions. I'm going to pose some questions to the panel first to try and sort of set the scene and help you understand a little bit more about where we're coming from and the work of these individuals and their organizations. So please think about some interesting questions that you might want to ask. Just before I introduce the panel, just to kind of add to Julia's comments, you may all be aware or not, as I hope you are all aware, there is an enormous race going on from governments and jurisdictions around the world to be the first to regulate AI. Here in Europe, the Commission are steaming ahead with the EU AI Act. Other areas, other jurisdictions are announcing their plans. Some differ, some are similar, depending on which kind of spectrum you're coming from. What is common, though, across all of those approaches is standards and standardization and how they are applied to support these various jurisdictions' regulatory regimes. So the conversation we're going to have today is of vital importance to those folks in the room who are either developing AI products and services or who are about to consume AI products and services, because this is coming. This is coming very quickly, and you'll all need to understand how you ensure that you are compliant with and understanding how you develop your products and services or consume the technology within the bounds of the regulation. No single jurisdiction can tell another jurisdiction what to do. So the EU can't tell the UK what to do, and the UK can't tell Canada what to do. So there needs to be harmonization, interoperability internationally, and this is kind of what we're trying to work towards as a group of organizations. So let's kick off. I'm just going to go down the row, and I'm going to ask our esteemed panel just to very quickly introduce themselves and their organizations. So Chantal, start with you.
Chantal, CEO, Standards Council of Canada. We're the national standards body, so we have a mandate for government to support the development and use of standards and conformity assessment in Canada.
Silvio?
Silvio, Deputy Secretary General of the International Organization for Standardization, which addresses all different sectors with a global mandate, with a very strong focus on inclusivity, and especially when it comes to the vulnerable communities around the world, developing countries, and all different segments and stakeholders of society.
Cinzia?
Thank you. Cinzia Missiroli, Director Standardization at Senelec, that are two of the three officially recognized European standardization organizations, and as such we are responsible to develop European standards in support of the internal market for a broad scope of products and services, everything with the exception of telecommunication, that is another organization. Yeah.
Thank you. And last but obviously not least, Neil.
So hi, I'm Neil Musk. I look after the standards body in the UK. BSI, that's part of BSI, which also has global businesses around consulting and certifying that standards are being and regulation are being met. With my surname, I have to be a bit careful about what I say with AI, but I don't even get a discount on a Tesla. So,
Neil, thank you. I'm going to ask this very basic 101 question because I'm assuming the audience, some of the audience might not actually know what a standard is. So I'm going to ask our panel, I'm going to start with Silvio to just explain firstly what is a standard, and why it is important, of what is a standard from their perspective, why is this important, and why does it help you as organizations and innovators in AI? So Silvio, we'll start with you.
It's a very philosophical question. Well, standard is basically an agreement between experts and stakeholders in a specific field about what's the best way of doing something. And it's a mechanism to build trust into the system and to scale solutions globally.
Shinzia?
Yeah. Well, of course, I support what Silvio just said. I couldn't be otherwise. And I would say that is a cost-efficient tool also to respond and to be compliant with the legislation. And I would also say that is, to put it in a simple term, a common language that can be used by anyone in order to, I would say, stop living in a Babel tower, but to make sure that we use the same solution.
Chantal?
I'm an engineer, so I'm very practical. It's a tool. It's a tool to meet an objective, and it's a tool based on consensus. It can be to meet a quality objective, a privacy objective, a responsible objective, an interoperability, I see your phone objective, right? That's a tool. It's a great tool. Been using it as a practitioner, and now I have the pleasure of supporting the development of those tools.
And perhaps just to add to what the panel have said, I think if you're not used to standards, you're probably in half the economy that doesn't use them every day, whereas half the economy does. And so a lot of industries like manufacturing, construction, aviation, aerospace use it as the sort of underpinning of how they agree things globally for things to happen. And the real power of it, to me, is threefold. One, that it's international. Two, that it brings together stakeholders from across the ecosystem. So it's not just industry, it's actually all parties playing a role. And thirdly, it's something that's agile and can move quickly relative to, say, regulation, which by its nature often has to be a bit more high level and a bit more for the long term. So one of the real advantages is standards can kind of help fill in the gap around what really needs to happen practically in an industry to build trust.
Thank you. Silvia, I'm going to come back to you to talk a little bit about your sort of role in ISO and the work that ISO is doing in terms of sort of international standardization in AI. Kind of what do you kind of see the priorities currently? And then I'll come back to a question about bias, which often comes up, and the work that ISO are doing on that. And I'll ask you that question after you've kind of explained what ISO is doing.
Oh. So in terms of the priorities, I think basically we have three. It's like main ones. So the first one is how do we ensure convergence and clarity to all stakeholders, players, agents, regulators, everyone interested in the field of AI. So that's bring clarity and convergence is the first one. The second is about that we need, and it's linked to the first, but and actually it's more linked to what I said in the beginning, it's about the systemic approach. That's the second one. Because it's not only about developing a standard in AI and another standard in AI, but how do we think systemically across all different AI as an ecosystem, and then from AI to all other different sectors where AI is used across health, transportation, energy, and so on. And the third is really bringing the best minds in the world to engage with the standards development. It's like to be really the platform of choice where everyone interested in developing standards to enable AI to live up to its potential, decides to engage and contribute and dedicate their time to develop those standards. I think these are the three main priorities. But then we have a technical community that is very vibrant, that is developing standards for AI and coordinate with all the other technical communities. And when it comes to the technical work of ISO and in the AI, again, it's like discussing with those teams, they have also three priorities. It's like one are the foundational standards, the foundational systems that are needed to enable all the rest. It's like a big management systems, thinking about transparency, bias, and so actually bias is on the second one, which is the trust that are in the different AI systems, how the standards can support addressing the need for trustfulness in AI. And the third one is risk management. Those are the three priorities when it comes to the technical work of ISO in AI. So the foundational standards, the trustfulness, and the risk management.
Okay, good. Thank you. Chantal, could you give us your sort of perspective on Canada's sort of viewpoint around regulation, around the work that you're doing in developing standards for your stakeholders within the North American market?
Yes. So as you have all, evaluated, AI is extremely powerful. It's also, for me, certainly very scary because we want to make sure that it's used in a responsible manner and a safe manner. So in Canada, we've made the same, constat. We've concluded the same thing, and we've taken really a strategic approach to standardization that is based on the 100+ years of work on standards based on collaboration and consensus, and also regulatory foresight. So what we did is 2 years ago, we created a program at Standards Council supported by our Minister, Innovation, Science and Economic Development. A program, we call it AI and Data Governance Standardization. And it's really aimed at ensuring that we develop the appropriate frameworks for Canada, that we have the appropriate standardization strategies, obviously linked to the international context, but also with specificities for Canada. We're, distinct nation, and we want to make sure that we carry through those frameworks our values. And there's two pieces to that program. One is a standardization collaborative on AI and data governance, and we're going to produce standardization strategies out of that. And the other piece, which I think is as important as developing standards, is the conformity assessment piece, the assurance that what we're designing the products or the systems for, we're going to be able to confirm that they're meeting the objectives, that they're fit for purpose. And we've actually created a conformity assessment program to actually test one of the international standards that is about to be issued, one on AI management system. And again, using specific requirements that are specific, again, to Canada, and learning from them. So that at the end, we tackle or harness the power of AI, but in a responsible and safe manner. That's how we've approached it in that way, a very strategic approach to it.
Thank you, brilliant. Neil, your perspective, what do we focus on in the UK? How are we tackling trust and confidence from BSI's perspective?
So I think similar to Chantal and Silvio, being BSI, we're all about trying to accelerate trust in this market. And so on the standard side, we're doing three things. One is contributing to the same development of those international standards, which is really an intense piece of work at the moment. The second thing is we are trying to help our clients and organizations and governments navigate this emerging field, because actually, as we found in areas like sustainability recently, there are a plethora of standards being developed by lots of well-meaning different organizations. Same with regulation. And it's very difficult as a user to understand and navigate through those. And as those standards emerge, to understand which ones you should comment on and how you can help. So we've created a thing in the UK called the AI Standards Hub with a couple of UK partners to help bring together access to what are effectively 2,000 different standards that relate to AI. And that's something we're working with Canada to kind of look at whether we can internationalize more fully. The third thing we're doing is we're trying to help people be able to use standards more effectively. So when you look at standards, there are a set of requirements, but they're quite detailed. But if you're, say, an electrician working on the front line or someone looking at AI in a small business, it's quite hard to have the time to kind of understand all of those requirements. So we're actually using AI ourselves. We've got an AI team who are looking at using large language processing to kind of be able to interrogate all those various standards with a simple language question, such as how can I use AI to impact my business, say I'm building barbecues, and it will produce those results. So that's what we're doing on the standard side. Just also on the other part of the business over the Chinese Wall, we also obviously working very extensively in consulting, helping organizations understand how to use AI and AI standards, and also, like Chantal, creating a notified body to be able to help organizations globally actually show that they are meeting those standards, which is going to be crucial to the trust of users, companies, organizations, supply chains, and broader society.
Fantastic, thank you. So I'm going to come to Cinzia now and talk about Senelec's work in the EU AI Act, as I'm sure quite a few of the audience are going to be quite interested in your viewpoint. So I'm interested in understanding the work that Senelec's doing in supporting the EU AI Act through those harmonised standards. But I think the most important question for us, now not sitting within the European Union, is how are we going to ensure that those standards that are being developed for the EU AI Act are truly international standards? So there's kind of there's a kind of viewpoint of the work you're doing, and then how do we ensure that those standards remain international?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. As a matter of fact, I wanted to ask the audience, how many, before I introduce myself, how many have ever heard about Senelec? Fantastic.
Good.
So, wow.
Yay.
Yes, fantastic. So I'm very happy to see that. So, and because people might wonder, well, we have ISO, we have IEC, we have international organization. Why purely European organizations? And as a matter of fact, we go a bit beyond the 27 EU member states. We also cover EFTA member countries, Turkey, Serbia, UK, of course, now, not anymore in the EU. Why Senelec develop European standards? Because, of course, we have the internal market, and the role of those organizations is really to develop one single tool that can support the internal market. And as a matter of fact, one main difference between SEN and ISO in this case is that when SEN publishes a document, its members are obliged to implement it at national level and withdraw any conflicting national standard. That means that you have one single solution across 34 countries. Of course, then industry stakeholders are free to use it or not, but if used it, especially in the case of those standards that support the European legislation, this help the industry to provide presumption, to claim a presumption of conformity with the European legislation, and that will be the case in future for those standards supporting the Artificial Intelligence Act. As you know, the Artificial Intelligence Act is still being discussed among the politicians. I recently read a post on LinkedIn from one of those that are highly involved at political levels, and now we hope to reach a compromise by the end of the year. Let's see if that is the case. Did they say which year? Yeah, they didn't. Let's hope that this is going to be the case, but I know that there are still tricky aspects that will need to be addressed. In the meantime, at the same time, the European Commission has issued what is called a standardization request to SEN and Senelec to develop standard in support of the AI. The first set of standards will not be referenced in the official journal, will not provide presumption of conformity with the European legislation, but it's the intention that in a few years' time that will be the case. Because since this is the first attempt, of course, to develop standards, harmonized standards in the field of AI Act, first we want to see how robust those are. And but of course we don't do it. Of course, in Brussels we are 90 people, and of course are not certainly the 90 people sitting in Brussels that are the one drafting the standards, are the experts in the relevant field that develop the standards and contribute to the standards. but we don't want to do standards just relevant for Europe. As we mentioned, it's important that these standards, especially in this area, are as much as possible globally relevant. That's why we check, we look, we assess what is done at international level and see whether what has been developed, for example, in ISO, is relevant for the European context, and then we adopt it and then implement it in Europe. And as a matter of fact, we have a cooperation agreement in ISO that allow us either to develop documents in parallel or to adopt what has already been developed at international level. I think there is no one interest to duplicate effort. If there is already something available that can be used in the European context, respecting the EU values, it's something that certainly can be kept and used and promoted, of course.
Are there any comments from any of the panel members about the EU AI Act from your perspective, Chantal, looking across the pond to what's going on in Europe?
Well, we're keeping a very, very close eye for, I guess, one key reason. We're a trading nation. More than 80% of our economy in Canada is based on first small and medium enterprises. And we have the largest trading partner to the south. And then we have one major trading partner across the pond. So it's very important for us, as we are supporting our SMEs, to keep an eye on what's happening internationally. And actually, as we are negotiating and building trade agreements around the world, and we just renewed the one with US and Mexico 2 years ago. We have a very good comprehensive trade agreement with Europe. We want to make sure that we include in those trade agreements provisions around standardization, right? It's an obligation under the OECD and the technical barriers to trade chapter, but we also know that if we are including the proper provisions around standardization, so standards and conformity assessment, we will facilitate trade. We will facilitate and support our SMEs. So we are keeping an eye, and we are actually having conversations right now with Sensenelec to look at ensuring that we're not creating a world in which my Canadian SMEs have to comply to something in Canada and then have to comply to something different in Europe or something different in UK. And we have a good agreement with UK as well. So that's really the context I think we're all working on, generally National Standards Body. We want to facilitate competitiveness of our organizations, our enterprises, our businesses. So we want to harmonize. We want to reduce the barriers to trade, and obviously a world where there would be 150 different ways of either regulating or having standards linked to AI would be a nightmare. So we're really working into harmonization. That's really a very important vision and a goal, not just for us as an NSB, but also for our government. They understand that trade is key for our economy. That means we have to work together.
Brilliant. Yes, I'm going to go to you, Neil, because obviously the pond is less for us. It's a short paddle across the pond. And thankfully, obviously, from a UK standardisation standpoint, we're still involved with Sensenelec, as you've talked about, in contributing those standards. But do you have a perspective on UK's perspective?
I suppose perhaps the interesting thing for me is that if you look at other areas that the EU's led on, such as GDPR, in practice that has probably by default set a global benchmark, because global organisations who have to deliver into Europe need to kind of meet that regulation. So their first question is going to be, why would I develop something separate for the rest of the world? Having said that, I think we're at a really interesting place in AI where you could see other regions saying, well, I like that, but it's quite demanding, and actually I might compete in a different way. I might be more competitive if I set a lower bar. And I think that's where standards can actually play a real role in helping glue together a more common benchmark. And we've seen that in the way that, for example, NIST in the US has used a lot of the ISO work in its own risk management framework as we are all collaborating to create common national linkages and discussing around the national standards and the way they evolve. And as I mentioned earlier on, the other key advantage is that standards, it's easier to evolve a standard more quickly. There's a regular review process that happens that means you can then, as we learn in this new industry, adjust. So I think we're at a really interesting space of watching whether the EU regulation will be the global benchmark or not. And secondly, standards can play a key role in helping assist and mitigate around that.
Thank you. Before I go to the floor, I'm going to ask a question that's come into my mind, because I did say I was going to ask you a question that we haven't rehearsed. And this should be a relatively simple one, but I'm going to put myself in the audience, and I'm going to ask a question they probably would ask, which is, I'm an SME, I'm a small organization, I haven't really got the time, I don't have lawyers, I don't have technical expertise. Why and how? Well, firstly, how would I get involved in contributing to standards? Because I'd like to. And secondly, why should I? Maybe I'll start with you, Silvio, and ask you that question. So it's I'd like to get involved. How do I get involved? And why do I need to get involved? From an SME's perspective.
Okay. Well, on the how, is about involving with our national standards bodies in the countries. It's like it's not the technical community of ISO is composed of the representatives of the national technical communities, what we call mirror committees, right? That existed. The why is fundamentally to be part of the discussion, to make sure that you can influence how it's that being developed, because not only in this domain but in many others, these SMEs have an interest in doing that, not only in AI but in their specific sectors, in health, transport, energy. And if they are not part of that discussion, it will only be defined by the big guys in that leading that industry, and then it might not reflect exactly their needs. So it's fundamental that they get engaged and involved in that process.
Super. And their voices will be heard, right?
Absolutely.
Chantal, your views.
Well, as I said, our economy is supported by SMEs, so we absolutely have to have SMEs involved, and we actually understand that there's a gap between the capacity of large entities and small, and we have a program to support financially, right? And in terms of why, I think Silvio expressed, I mean, standards are not neutral. They are consensus-based, but they are based on the perspectives, the values, and the experience of the people writing them. So if you want your values, your expertise, your experience to be in the standards, you got to be part. You got to be around the table. And I want to share maybe a little story. But we have been now supporting a lot of innovators in Canada because we see standards like IP. You need to think about your standardization strategy at the inception of your idea as an innovator. And we have brought to the international tables Canadian innovators that when they sat at the table, they saw all their competitors. They had not been present. So they had to use what was developed by their competitors. If you're at the table, you can influence, and you can really, I think, bring a lot more value to your own business. So I think that's a very interesting, I think, argument for SMEs to get involved. And in Canada, we're there to help your involvement.
Fantastic. Shinzia?
Well, Chantal said it beautifully. I cannot say more than what she said. I would say be in the driver's seat, not sit back in on the back seat of the bus. Be part of the game. It's important that for SMEs to make your voice heard, and that's only being part of the game that you can make sure that this is done. Of course, in Europe you have committees at European level, but those are mirrored in the national countries. So even if you don't speak English, it doesn't matter, because you can have the dialogue and the discussion and contribute in your own language at national level. And that could be, of course, arranged with our members, the national standardization bodies. And on top of that, in Europe, you have a federation that represents the interest of small and medium enterprises in standardization. And if you want to know more, please come and see me and can get in touch with them, because through them you can make, again, your voice heard at European level.
Neil, can you put a cherry on the top? It's already been said.
I'll try. They've articulated it very well. Two things to add. One, on the how, we didn't talk about the fact that you don't have to sit on the committee to influence the standard. So there are a group of people who volunteer who do that. But crucially, there's a stage where every standard goes out for public consultation, and actually then you can put a comment in, and that comment gets managed to look for commonalities of comments, but then all of those comments get reviewed by the committee. So that's also an answer to the why. So it's very easy to do that, and actually things like the AI standards have made that easier, because if you're an SME, you can go to one place and see all the 2,000 standards that you might be interested in, or the 50 that are up for consultation. So, well, that one's very relevant to my industry. That one's going to have a massive impact on my ability to compete in, say, the US, and you can put a direct comment in. The why, to me, it's a very efficient process, surprisingly efficient. You put your comment in, it gets reviewed by the national committee. That, in turn, goes straight up to the international committee. So, amazingly, an SME in Cambridge in the UK, at 2 steps, can influence the global standard. And I can't think of many other systems where that can happen. And a lot of my friends run AI companies in the UK, and actually they ask the same question. And once you explain, once you demystify it, they're really impressed at how quickly they can make a difference.
So there's no excuse not to get involved, guys. I can ask questions all day. Is there any questions from the audience for our esteemed panel? There's a few hands going up.
Oh. Wow. Is there a mic for the questions?
Do we have a mic to go around the room?
I think she's coming out. I don't know.
To whoever's first.
Here. There's a question. Oh, there's that.
One here, one here.
One there.
Yeah, hi. So what happens when people go to a new place and don't, I guess, abide by the regulations? What would happen if they just decide to up and leave and go to a non-regulated location?
So is the question, what happens if an organization moves from a heavy regulated area to a non-regulated area?
Exactly.
It's an interesting question. Anybody fancy taking that one on? It probably doesn't matter. I mean, there's no boundaries or borders for this. So just by moving isn't going to necessarily help you, if that's kind of the argument here. But anybody else want to pick it up?
Maybe if I can. I think it's important to make a differentiation between the standards and regulations. I think that's the first. The standards are fundamentally voluntary. The legislation, which is mandatory and based on a jurisdiction, might refer to a standard as that's a good way. If you want to comply with the law, maybe that you might start to look at that standard, right? It's like, but the standards are not regulations. So and if you don't comply with the legislation in one country, move to another country, well, then that goes much beyond the AI, right? It's like in any other sector that you'll be not in compliance with the law, and you have to face the consequences of that. But it goes beyond the standards that.
And it's perhaps worth adding that from a voluntary point of view, as Craig Stivell said yesterday in his speech, actually we find that you would struggle to compete, because essentially society, government and clients and supply chains will typically demand that you meet that standard once they realize it's the right thing. So yes, you can go off and do something, maverick over there, but fundamentally the advantage of standards is that people get together to say, actually, that doesn't make sense.
Depends what market you want to access, right? It's not where you are, it's which market you're interested in too.
And standards shouldn't just be about compliance either. Doing best practice should be a good thing for your business, right? Next question.
There were more questions.
There's some more questions around the room. Where have we got the mic? Here we go. Gentlemen, handsome chap here, look.
Hey, thanks for the great discussion. So I'm interested in how to make, for example, ethics happen in engineering, and also I've been looking at standards. And even though you make it sound so easy to make a standard, that's great. But for example, IEEE 7000, which I believe is also an ISO standard, I think that took 5 years to develop, right? And to then vote it through. So is there some effort between all the standardization bodies to streamline these developments and maybe try to push joint approaches? And I think that's also interesting in terms of harmonized standards, which is a really big blind spot in the AI Act, so to speak, as to what should I really do as a company to comply, right? So yeah, that's my question. Thanks.
Sylvia, are you happy to have a go at that one? We start the conversation.
I can start the conversation, but I have two heads of standards development here.
Yes.
So before I hand to you, the one concept that for us at ISO, and I believe my colleagues will share, is that it's very easy to get 6 people in a room, put it in there for 3 weeks, and develop a standard or something. But what will be the legitimacy of that standard? I think the process is crucial. The consensus building process, the involvement of different stakeholders, the consultation across other jurisdictions. Our economy, especially the most advanced sectors of the economy, where because of how it is divided, the large companies are based in few countries that have those expertise. In many areas, when it comes to ethics and all these trust, you cannot be develop international standards that have a global legitimacy based on opinions of people from 4 different countries. In our technical committee in this area, we have 60 countries represented there, 250 people meeting in 2 weeks from now to have the plenary of that area, and from 60 different countries, and that is fundamental. And that then, the multiple rounds of consultation take time. But please, I have much more equivalent people here.
Shinzia?
Yeah, I just wanted to also highlight, because one of the aspects that was raised in the question is indeed alignment, and how crucial is the alignment. Standards are not there to make your life more difficult, are there to support you in your business and make life easier. So, as a matter of fact, alignment is crucial for us and at European level, and especially also for those standards that will need to be developed in the frame of the AI Act. We really look at what's done at international level. Really, global relevance is our key aspect. We really want to go global first and see what global solution can be, as I was mentioned before, applied in Europe. And as a matter of fact, one of the first activities that we did once we created the technical committee in Europe, it was already to see what is already available, what is already existing in ISO, I don't know, also IEEE for sure, other even industry standards that could be used as basis for the development of the European standard. We don't want to reinvent the wheel if there is no need to reinvent the wheel. So, of course, for us, this is absolutely crucial, not to make, guys, your life more difficult. And as we are also agreement with other parts of the world, other than with our privileged agreement with ISO, in order to make sure that we align as much as possible in our efforts.
Perhaps also to say there's often misconception standards take ages to develop. We did ones in the COVID thing in 2 weeks. We did the first global standard on net zero in 3 months last year. So it is feasible to do, but you have to balance it with getting that international consensus. So the real power is if you get an international standard, full international standard, it essentially will it'll be relevant in 140 plus countries, which is a very powerful thing.
There are more questions. I think we'll take one more. I'm being very mindful that I've been told to keep to time, and I've got less than a minute left. So please keep it brief. One last question. Who's got a really interesting burning one? High and really high.
She's the closest to the microphone.
This better be good.
I saw her and I ran. One thing that we do in our company is try to take the lessons learned from other regulations and that sort of thing, such as data, such as privacy. What can you comment on lessons learned from other regulations that are global and may not be standardized?
Anyone want to pick that up?
Well, I suppose the point, which people don't always know, is that there's 100,000 standards out there. We've got 100 years of history doing it. We brought consensus together 100 years. So honestly, the ability to create a standard that is globally understood, successful, and doesn't mean you're going to get sued is something that really this system brings. So I think that's probably what I'd emphasize, is that it's a really well-established mechanism that can be applied to new challenges such as this, such as sustainability.
Sylvia?
I'd like to build on that about the lessons learned, I think, and that is super important. In AI, one of the big topics and concerns that we have been listening about, explainability, robustness, or avoided bias, cognitive bias. That's our bread and butter in many other areas. How do we avoid cognitive bias? It's like that's why we bring 150 people to discuss from different countries, have that consensus. But that we started not now with AI, with toy safety regulations 50 years ago. We have been learning for that process. How do you build safety across different systems of society, in food, in health, in pharmaceuticals, in toys, in everything. So I think this standard system is a system that builds on the previous experience from other sectors, bringing those learnings to a frontier field like AI that we have at this moment, which enables the agility that is needed. I really don't want that to stick in our mind the 5 years that happen in one or the other standards. Actually, it's much faster, much more agile process than that, because we are building on the lessons learned of other sectors.
And using technology to do it more and more.
Yeah.
That's the other important part.
Absolutely,
Is using AI, it's using technology to have a platform that is a lot more inclusive, allows a lot more insights and comments from a diversity of people around a topic. So that's also the beauty of using technology.
Fantastic. We are out of time, I'm afraid. I know you guys had lots of hands up. Please come and ask our panel questions. They're around. They're going to be around all day, so come and ask them. And I'd just like to thank our 4 esteemed panelists for their time this afternoon. A round of applause, I think, if that would be appropriate.
Thank you.